Lori and her husband Alex went on a family vacation to a remote, tranquil lake in the heart of New Mexico. The location was secluded, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was the perfect place for a quiet vacation surrounded by the breathtaking beauty of nature. The group consisted of about 10 people, including Alex's siblings, cousins, and a few close friends. Their campsite was a picturesque setting for relaxation and adventure. On one particularly relaxing evening, both Lori's group and the neighboring campground of 6 were engrossed in the time-honored traditions of camping, building fires, sharing stories, and enjoying drinks. The moon illuminated the campground with a soft silvery light, creating a cozy atmosphere. As night fell, the laughter and chatter of the group filled the air, mingling with the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. The stars shone brightly overhead, creating a stunning picture in the night sky. It was the epitome of a perfect hike, until a chilling sound pierced the serene night and stopped the fun. The sound was unmistakably recognizable as the cry of a girl calling for help. A collective shiver ran down the backs of the campers, faces pale with disbelief. In the heart of this wilderness, where no children should be, they were sure they had heard the cry of a child in distress. The eerie scream echoed through the air, sending shivers down their spines. Lori and the rest of the group exchanged worried glances. A sense of unease descended on them like a heavy fog, and the cheerful atmosphere around the campfire was abruptly replaced by tension and fear. Concerned for the safety of the children who might be in danger, they decided to band together and search for the source of the screams. Armed with flashlights and a sense of shared responsibility, they set off in the direction of the chilling screams. Behind their campsite was an open field, beyond which stretched an impenetrable darkness. Flashlight beams illuminated the path, creating an eerie tunnel of light in the impenetrable darkness. After a while, they spotted a figure in the distance, a tall silhouette shrouded in an otherworldly, ghostly white glow. The sight was surreal, to say the least. The group moved closer, steps cautious, heart pounding. The figure was about 2 meters tall, unusually thin and unnaturally white, like part of a moonlit night. They approached slowly, uncertainty gnawing at them. It seemed as if the very air itself grew heavy with anticipation. But as they approached, the figure began to recede, gliding backward with an eerie grace until it disappeared behind the tall trees at the edge of the field. They stood, puzzled and gripped with fear and curiosity. The encounter was, to say the least, strange and unsettling. They could not understand exactly what it was that they had seen. Various assumptions about the mysterious figure emerged in the group. Some assumed it was a lost hiker. Others thought it was a ghostly presence. However, none of these ideas reflected the strangeness of what had happened. However, the night was far from over. As they made their way back to their camp, the feeling of unease never left them. A shroud of mystery seemed to have descended over the whole area. The night passed in troubled dreams, disturbed by a constant sense of discomfort and, strangely enough, by the insistent sounds of a little girl's voice, seemingly calling for help. The screams echoing through the forest tore at my nerves. It was a ghostly chorus that paralyzed them with fear. Every time they thought the scream had stopped, it came back with more desperate insistence, like the ghostly plea of an invisible child. Lori, Alex, and the rest of the group lay sleepless, paralyzed with fear and intrigue. What had they stumbled upon in the moonlit field? What was it? A lost child? A mysterious creature? Or something else entirely? Hours passed as they huddled in their tents. The night hid its secrets, and the eerie screams continued to haunt their troubled dreams. In a small, quiet town nestled among rolling hills and ancient woods, a huge cemetery spread out like an endless sea of tombstones. One cool fall evening, Braden and his friend Justin were driving an old beat-up Subaru through the cemetery. They stopped, drove down the hill, and pulled up to a small pond. The engine roared as they made their way through the maze of narrow roads that looped among the graves. Tall trees cast long shadows across the desolate landscape. The Subaru's headlights pierced the darkness as they drove deeper into the heart of the place. As they stopped the car at the top of a gentle hill, they felt a peculiar feeling overwhelm them. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, but curiosity compelled them to go forward. They made their way down the hill, guided only by the dim moonlight. As they descended, the path led them to a small pond whose surface reflected the pale light of the moon like liquid glass. On the other side of the pond, A figure sat alone on a large stone overgrown with moss. The mysterious silhouette was dressed entirely in black. Friends exchanged perplexed glances. "Strange," Braden muttered, not knowing whether to approach. Their voices broke the silence, and they waved awkwardly, calling out uncertainly hello. The mysterious figure remained motionless, gazing into the black depths of the pond. Braden and Justin exchanged perplexed glances, their anxiety growing. Just as they were about to back away, a chill ran down their spines as the man on the rock jumped to his feet. Without thinking, he rushed towards them, seemingly defying physics, and ran through the water. Panic gripped Braden and Justin as the stranger approached, his steps becoming quick and unnatural. They screamed and ran to the car. With trembling hands, Braden fumbled for the car keys, slid them into the ignition and turned them. The engine coughed and hissed, but wouldn't start. Panic was growing. The car wouldn't start and they heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant banging, but every few seconds they heard it. "Come on, start it," shouted Braden, his voice shaking with fear. Justin, who was sitting in the passenger seat, turned to look out the back window and the color disappeared from his face. He whispered, "Braden, there's something out there." Braden's gaze followed Justin's and their eyes met the wide, fear-filled eyes of the stranger from the pond, his face pressed against the rear window, distorted in a horrifying grimace. He struck the glass with bony, pale hands, emitting an eerie clatter. Terror gripped the friends as they realized they were trapped. Braden tried desperately to start the car, but it stubbornly remained stationary. The figure outside the window continued to pound on the window, leaving smudged handprints and wailing silently. Fear clutched their chests, and they knew they had to run. Braden reached for his phone to call for help, but there was no signal and Justin's phone was just as useless. They were trapped in the ominous darkness of the cemetery, unable to call for help or escape the onslaught of the ghostly stranger. An eternity seemed to pass as they sat in the car, gripped by fear and the incessant tapping on the window. There was an eerie, suffocating pressure around them, as if the very air itself was heavy with anger. Finally, in a last desperate attempt, Braden turned the ignition key, and the old Subaru started with a roar. Without a second's hesitation, Braden stepped on the gas pedal, and the car sped away from the cemetery. As they crossed the cemetery's iron gate, the banging stopped abruptly, breathing heavily and still shaking. Braden and Justin were finally in the welcoming embrace of the dimly lit streets. As they crossed the city limits, a sense of profound relief swept over them, and their phones immediately regained signal. One thing was undeniable: something inexplicable had happened at the cemetery. They were haunted by memories of the man in black, a ghostly figure that could run on water and possess terrifying determination. The encounter defied any logical explanation, and Braden and Justin couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a prank or a hallucination. Something otherworldly lurked in the shadows that night. Caleb had always dreamed of finding the perfect home for his family. After years of hard work and saving, he finally purchased a charming old house in the quiet town of Willowbrook, located in the heart of the beautiful countryside. It was a beautiful, spacious place with a white picket fence, a lush garden, and an air of serenity. Caleb and his 3 children, Emma, David, and Lily, were excited about this new endeavor. The children were young, full of energy and curiosity, and they couldn't wait to explore every corner of their new home. What they didn't know yet was that their idyllic dreams would soon be replaced by nightmares. The realtor who sold them the house was very helpful and friendly, but she had a creepy story to tell. She said that before them, a woman named Eleanor had lived in the house, whose life had been tragically cut short by an abusive husband. Eleanor's tragic fate hung a dark cloud over the house, and the townspeople spoke in hushed tones about her troubled life and deep hatred of men. Caleb and his children moved into the house, hoping to make a fresh start and bring back the warmth. They laid out their belongings, hung family photos, and painted the rooms in cheerful colors. Emma, the oldest, set up her room in the attic overlooking the starry night sky, and David and Lily shared a room in the hallway. The trouble began unbidden. One morning, Caleb woke up to find his hands covered in unexplained scratches. At first, he thought they were the result of a restless sleep, but as time passed, the scratches reappeared, increasingly angry and pronounced. Soon it wasn't just Caleb who began to notice. David, too, began waking up with similar marks on his skin, though he didn't remember scratching himself. Emma, always the rational one, tried to explain it away with allergies or a new laundry detergent. But David, skeptical as ever, couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that lingered in the house. One evening, a tense situation arose in the house. David and Lily were constantly fighting, and David, unable to contain his anger, threw a toy at Lily, hitting her in the forehead. Tears came to Lily's eyes and she ran to her room, leaving David alone with his guilt. That night, something horrifying happened. David awoke to a cold, eerie presence in his room, but when he tried to move, he found he was paralyzed. His breathing quickened as he realized he couldn't move a single muscle. Panic spilled through his veins as he saw a shadowy figure slowly materialize in front of him. The figure, shrouded in darkness, reached out a curled ghostly hand and touched David's forehead, causing him to cry out. As the figure disappeared, David felt a searing pain in his nose and realized he was bleeding profusely. He clutched his face, blood rushed through his fingers, and the room seemed to spin. When he finally came to, he was alone, frightened and marked by another ghostly encounter. The next morning, David told his family what had happened and his voice shook with fear. His father realized that it couldn't go on like this. A few days later, they moved to another new house and all the weirdness came to an end. Miranda and William's love story began in the bustling college town of Crestwood. They were young, full of dreams, and deeply in love with each other. Shortly after graduating from college, they decided to take the next step in their journey and get married. Looking for a place to start their life together, they found a small apartment that they could afford. The apartment was in an old, dilapidated building on Elm Street, nestled among tall oak trees that held the secrets of many generations. The place had a certain charm, but that charm soon revealed a dark and disturbing secret. At first, the new home seemed cozy, but as time passed, strange things began to happen to Miranda. She began to hear eerie noises, whispers, and footsteps in the dark. William brushed off these claims, writing them off as the creaks and groans of an aging building. Miranda, however, was convinced otherwise. One fateful evening as they were preparing dinner, Miranda screamed in horror as plates, glasses, and objects began to fly off the shelves. An invisible force seemed to be hurling these objects across the room. William rushed to Miranda, shielding her from the chaos, but he felt an unexplainable force that seemed to be wreaking havoc in their home. Further on, events unfolded in an escalating fashion. Miranda began to experience an unshakable sense of dread and foreboding. She often thought she saw dark shadows and began to have nightmares in her sleep. Worse, she was physically harmed. Bruises and scratches began to appear on her skin that seemed to have been inflicted by invisible hands. One evening as they sat on the couch, the room became unnaturally cold and tension hung in the air. Miranda shrieked and pointed to a corner of the room where the temperature plummeted. There, a ghostly, translucent figure with eyes full of malice appeared out of the shadows. It was a poltergeist, a restless spirit that seemed to despise their presence. Days turned to weeks. The feeling of being watched grew stronger and stronger, and Miranda's once beautiful spirit was sapped by fear. Those nights were the worst. 2 days later, they moved out of the apartment, and the relief was palpable. They temporarily moved in with relatives while they searched for a new place to live. Shortly after they left, the old lady who owned the house passed away and the property was sold. A few months later, the old building was demolished, leaving behind an empty lot, overgrown with grass and surrounded by scattered firewood and garbage. The place that had once been their home was now an abandoned wasteland. As the years passed, Miranda and William rebuilt their lives and sense of security. They often drove past the empty lot on Elm Street, and the memories of their experiences kept them awake, leaving the inexplicable horrors they had endured in their minds. The mystery of the poltergeist was never solved. In the quiet town of Cedarville, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, St. Joseph's Hospital served as a beacon of hope for the sick and suffering. It was a place where dedicated medical professionals like Amy, a forensic nurse, worked hard to treat those who needed it most. For Amy, her assignment was particularly unique. She was assigned to the isolation ward, a place reserved for the most complex and mysterious cases. Little did she know that one of those cases would plunge her into a world of mystery and horror she couldn't even imagine. It all began with an elderly woman named Eliza who entered the isolation ward with a chilling story. She claimed to be tormented by the malevolent presence of a demon she called Tiberius. The staff, skeptical at first, were soon drawn into a nightmarish whirlwind of inexplicable events that defied any explanation. On her first night in the ward, Amy, along with the medical team, gave Elise routine care. They left the room thinking everything was fine. But seconds later, blood-curdling screams echoed through the corridors. Frightened, they rushed back to Elise's room and found her in a complete mess. Her face was battered, her lip was bloody, there was a bruise under her eye, and there were incomprehensible marks all over her frail body. She seemed to be engaged in a brutal battle with an unseen foe. Panic and disbelief gripped the staff. Elise's condition could not be self-harm, the injuries were too severe. It was decided to put protective bandages on her for fear that she might be a danger to herself. The room was sealed and secured and no one, including Elise, could manipulate its restraints. But the inexplicable continued. New footprints mysteriously appeared on the hospital floor, leading from the bed to the window. A medical tray and cart, too heavy to be moved unaided, would suddenly appear at the far end of the room. Staff were at a loss trying to understand the source of these eerie phenomena. Desperate to make sense of the situation, they questioned Elise about what was happening. She always answered the same thing, whispering shakily, it was Tiberius. Weeks turned into months, and as Elise's condition did not improve, the hospital staff came to a chilling realization. There was something evil and supernatural about what was happening that defied scientific and logical explanation. Tensions mounted, and the isolation ward became a place of fear and anxiety for all who entered. Finally, one day Eliza was discharged from the hospital. The staff hoped that the nightmare was over, but they were wrong. The ward itself seemed to contain the evil energy that had tormented Elise. The nurses and doctors were hesitant to enter it, constantly pulling straws to determine who should have a routine checkup. At night, a hospital security guard reported strange phenomena in the isolation ward. The lights in Elise's former room would go on and off, casting eerie shadows dancing across the walls. The room became a source of fear for everyone at the hospital, and no one could explain the strange phenomena that continued long after Eliza left.